Good morning and welcome to day 2 of the American Head and Neck Society Symposium at the annual CASA meeting. Coming together in crisis, the conversations we need to have, COVID, disparity, ethics, education, and our future. I want to thank everyone who participated in yesterday's meeting. It was truly an extraordinary event, I think, for all the presenters, moderators, and for the membership who attended. If you wish to access the content from yesterday's meeting, you can do that by going to the main meeting screen and clicking on the content from yesterday, and that should come up. It'll be available in a more segmented fashion later, but is available now. We'll now begin our second day, which will address topics that are so crucial to us as members of the Head and Neck Society, physicians, caregivers, and educators. These topics will challenge you in the moment, but also challenge you to come up with plans that will make a difference for the betterment of all that we interact with. I transition now to our co-chair, Melanie Nance, who's done a wonderful job putting this together, and we look forward to a wonderful day. Melanie?
Thank you, Dan. It's been great working with you, and thank you for logging in this morning. Good morning. We have a great day planned for today with a wide variety of topics, but I just wanted to say first, thank you, but also these are sensitive topics, and sometimes the topics and the discussion may strike a nerve. That's okay. This is an open forum for us to learn and grow together. And so I encourage you to open your mind and participate, join in and put a question in if you'd like. I'd like to welcome our first panel this morning, which will be Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Facts, Challenges, and Actions. And our moderator will be Dr. Vicente Resto, who's the professor and chair at the Department of Otolaryngology, Head and Neck Surgery, as well as the Vice President for Physician Integration and Strategic Alignment at UTMB Galveston. So welcome, Dr. Resto.
Thank you, Dr. Nance and Dr. Deschler. On behalf of the panel, I want to thank both of you as well as the leadership of the Society for this opportunity to dive into what we all believe to be a critically important topic, not only for so many years, but recently of increased import. We hope that we have some substrate here for great discussion. With no further ado, I want to introduce our panelists. I'm excited to share the stage with some real leaders in regards to the idea and the topic of diversity. So firstly, my name is Vicente Resto, and I'm coming to you from UTMB in Galveston, Texas. I'm happy to introduce alongside me Dr. Bonnie Simpson-Mason. She currently serves as the Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion for the ACGME and has done tremendous work at a national level looking at the issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we look forward to a lot of excellent information from her. She will be followed by Dr. Sonya Malekzadeh. Sonya is Program Director, Professor and Vice Chair at Georgetown University. She will be touching on some of the aspects of diversity as it relates to our residencies and resident selection process, which I think most of us understand will be changing shortly in potentially exciting ways. Next, we will hear from Dr. Gina Jefferson, who is co-chair with me in the diversity service for the Society. She currently serves as Division Director of the Head and Neck Oncologic Surgery section at the University of Mississippi. Gina is going to share with the group the work that we have been doing within the Society regarding diversity as part of the diversity service. And lastly, we're going to round up with Dr. Doug Girod and Dr. John Krouse. Dr. Girod is past president of our Society, currently professor of otolaryngology, head and neck surgery, and chancellor of the University of Kansas. And Dr. John Krouse, also professor of otolaryngology, head and neck surgery, and currently serving as dean of the School of Medicine and executive vice president of health affairs at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. I think we bring together individuals with varied and very integrating perspectives on this topic. And I hope that you will all enjoy a fruitful conversation with us this morning. With no further ado, I will introduce Dr. Simpson-Mason. Bonnie.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Resto, and I really appreciate being here as a part of the panel. Let me just make sure I can share my slides. Okay, there we are. So thank you so much for having me this morning. I'm certainly really appreciative of the opportunity to participate in this session with fellow surgeons. I am Dr. Bonnie Simpson Mason, Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the ACGME. I'm also trained as an orthopedic surgeon and am on faculty with Dr. Ronald Lindsay at UTMB as well. So this morning, I wanted to just take a couple moments to discuss just a little bit about myself and my background and how I had the honor to arrive in this particular space with you today. Here I am as a chief resident, one of two women in this program. This was my Howard University orthopedic surgery, Department of Orthopedics, way back before there were work duty hour restrictions and things of that nature. And this is actually where I had the honor of being a resident. I believe I was a chief resident and Dr. Gina Jefferson was either an intern or a PGY2 coming into Howard's surgery program as well. So that's where we met and we've been colleagues since then. So Dr. Jefferson, thank you so much for having me today. So needless to say, the issue of diversity has been relevant in my career, both from a gender perspective, but also from a racial ethnic perspective, given that orthopedic surgery is still the least diverse specialty in medicine. So otolaryngology, you have us beat. Prior to coming to the ACGME, and then also at this time as a chief resident, I did encounter some significant challenges. I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, which cut my orthopedic surgery career clinically short. Was able to operate and see patients for only about 5 years as an attending, but my goal was to make sure that the pathway for more women and underrepresented minority students aspiring to go into competitive fields of medicine and surgery to make sure that pipeline was open. So I founded an organization called Interventions. And for the past 17 years, we've been working with students from across the country through a 5-phase longitudinal mentoring program, which has helped to expose hundreds and hundreds of students across the country in conjunction with the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgery, tons of chairmen and chairwomen across the country as well, who provided opportunities for these students to have this 5-phased approach, which has yielded some really good results over the past since 2008, we have an 81% match rate of all of our women and underrepresented medicine students who've applied. With this exceeds the national match rate, which hovers right around 73 or 74%. So at Interventions, we're finding that it is not just a one-time, one-touch exposure to specialty fields of medicine. It is an ongoing longitudinal approach with a long-term ROI to make sure that we're able to increase diversity, meaning this is the number of students who have matched into fields of orthopedic surgery. And what we were able to do was look at our odds ratio and find that once students matriculated through the Interventions program as medical students, so this is a UME program of supporting these students through their matriculation into residency, that women were 45 times more likely to apply to orthopedic surgery with this longitudinal approach. And those who are underrepresented in medicine were 15 times more likely. We found that this approach also extrapolates to other specialties. And so we would encourage surgeons here today, especially those of you who are in program leadership, to think about how you can begin some longitudinal work in your space in order to increase the sheer numbers. It is through this work over time that I've met and worked with Dr. Bill McDade, who's now the Chief Diversity Officer at the ACGME, who brought me on board just a year ago. And so our office has been in place only over the past 2 years, but we've been able to get a significant amount of work done then. When it comes to DEI, I would also recommend that everyone has a set of core values or position statements that it launches in order to make sure that we verbalize on a frequent basis what our actual goals are and why. And so these are our position statements from our Office of DEI, that health equity is the means to achieve elimination of health disparities or inequities. We want to work towards increasing workforce diversity in the physician workforce and workplace, but we need equity in order to achieve that, as well as inclusion. So this is the interplay of the DE&I statements. Diversity alone, we know, does not work. It has to be integrated with equity and inclusion. And when we don't have that, we have the resulting disparities that we've seen across the country. Dr. Garrick and Dr. Alson and fellow authors revealed that, in fact, diversity does matter for health. In this study out of California, they were able to randomize Black patients to being treated with Black doctors by Black doctors or white doctors. And the findings were significant. Not only was trust and a communication bridge built between patients and doctors with racial concordance, but also the actual disease states were impacted significantly, with an increase leading to a reduction, I should say, in the Black-white gap when it comes to cardiovascular mortality. Diabetes and cholesterol screening were also up when there was racial concordance. Now, the issue is we will not be able to create, develop, or produce enough Black doctors to treat all Black patients. But what we do want is to raise awareness amongst all physicians that when there is not a concordance between your race and that of your patients, or your culture, or your ethnicity, that you may have to take a little bit more time to make sure that we are building trust bridges so that we can achieve optimal health outcomes. So once again, achieving health equity can be accomplished through many means. Our focus at ACGME is on the physician workforce diversity piece, but we know that all of these elements are critical in order to achieve so. When we look at diversifying the physician workforce, these are the stats on the graduates from the totality of GME programs across the country, across about a 15-year period. And we can see that early on, we had about 23,000 residents total. Our numbers of white residents have, over time, have increased a couple of percentage points to about 49% here in 2018, 2019. And this is with a 7,000, an increase of about 7,000 residents across the board. We also see that our Asian residents have increased as well, about 3 percentage points. But what we don't see in the green bar and in the red bar is a significant increase in the number of African-American residents, and also the number of Latinx residents across the board. So these are the areas where we need to see increased numbers of our residents making it through, not just matching, but matriculating successfully through residency and becoming board certified physicians. Just drawing your attention also quickly to, I know that many of us are academicians and scholars, the ACGME does publish data based on gender diversity in about, 50 different viewpoints and perspectives, analyzing the demographic makeup of our residents on an annual basis. And so this is one of the types of graphs that you can find at the ACGME, on the ACGME's website. Here you are at otolaryngology with 37.4% of your residents being women. Here we are, orthopedic surgery at the bottom, 16%, which is actually almost a 3-fold increase from when I was in residency. So we are doing better, we just aren't doing well enough. You can also break down your residents according to subspecialty and sex. Here we have, from a binary approach, both male and female, that 34.7%. You can look at this data too for race, ethnicity, race and ethnicity as well. just a little more information. And then finally, I just want to encourage everyone, this work is supremely important and important enough for ACGME to have now incorporated requirements around recruitment and retention of diverse residents into our program requirements. So this is program requirement 1C that encourages all programs and institutions to focus on a mission-driven approach to recruiting and retaining a diverse workforce, residents, fellows, and faculty and staff. So we're not just limiting this work to residents. We also want to make sure that that our learning environments are critically important. So here's the diversity. Yes, we can increase our numbers, but if our learning environments are not safe, inclusive, and equitable, then we will not retain residents and through to board certification, which is the ultimate goal. So we have to make sure that our environments are free from discrimination, mistreatment, or harassment. And so this is program requirement 6B6. For programs, and this is the institutional requirement as well that corresponds. We also want to make sure our environments are safe such that residents can report any issues without fear of retaliation or psychological safety, 2A4A10. And then also too, maybe you knew this or not, we're moving away from that first year board certification pass rate as being a program requirement, but we are moving towards a 7-year rolling board certification pass rate, which should help to relieve some of the stress and pressure that we feel when we are selecting residents and we are concerned as to whether they will pass the boards. Our ultimate board pass rate across all specialties is right at 98%. And over this 7-year period of time, we have found that most residents at that percentage pass rate will pass the boards. So I will close with, once again, just asking everyone to have an aim or a goal for the work that you want to do in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Make sure your leadership is well versed in this. We want to make sure that we are not focusing on the learners to do this work, but it is the responsibility of the specialty associations and organizations. So kudos to you all for having this conference in this particular session today, our institutions, program, and faculty leadership, not just focusing on the learners, to integrate all 4 of these areas in order to eliminate health disparities. I had the honor of co-authoring this particular piece in AAOS Now, which talks about actual steps that program leadership can take in order to serve as allies for both residents and faculty who are from minoritized backgrounds, especially in this past year as we've had so much racial unrest. It is our responsibility to be supportive of our residents, and we're super excited about being able to offer these options to you. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, I can be reached at this email address, but I can also answer any questions in the chat. Dr. Resto, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Mason. I think, in order to keep us on time, we'll probably try to hold questions to the end, and you can submit these, through the portal, as has been done through the rest of the meeting. With no further ado, I'd like to transition over to Dr. Sonya Malekzadeh. I think it'll follow very nicely. She will be talking to us about diversity from the perspective of our own residency training environments. Dr. Malekzadeh, thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Can you see my slides? Ah, thanks to do that. Okay, good morning. Thank you, Dr. Resto and Dr. Jefferson, for the invitation to participate in this panel. Also for allowing me to weigh in on this very important topic. I think clearly there are a plethora of opportunities for us to address and improve diversity in medicine as well as otolaryngology. And today my goal is to focus on the residency recruitment and application process. I don't have any disclosures to report. I think Dr. Simpson Mason made it abundantly clear. We know that diversity does matter. There are countless studies and reports that have demonstrated the benefits of increasing diversity within medicine and certainly within the workplace. We know that a heterogeneous workforce is more creative, it's nimble, it's more productive. And diversity is an issue not only for inclusive representation within our field, but also for the optimal care of our increasingly diverse patient population. We know that diversity in physician teams can lead to improved quality of care, higher patient satisfaction, enhanced care for our underserved populations, and certainly better patient compliance with treatment plans. And certainly increasing diversity is good for medicine, it's good for our specialty. But unfortunately, as Dr. Simpson Mason alluded to, that diversity in otolaryngology residency programs in the United States does not reflect the applicant pool of the communities that we serve. If you look at this from a gender perspective, this is women in otolaryngology in the current state of women in otolaryngology. And we've certainly made great strides. You can see we're sort of now at that 35% compared to other residency programs. And AAMC tells us that about 50.5% of medical students are women. But again, we only make up 35% of that within otolaryngology training programs. And then if we look at underrepresented minorities and how we're doing in recruiting them into otolaryngology, we are one of the least diverse specialties. So this is data from a couple of years ago, 2015, demonstrating otolaryngology is at the very bottom for specialties. According to the Census Bureau, US population is estimated to be around 13% that identifies Black and African American, and recent data from 2018-2019 shows that only 2% of our otolaryngology residents are Black African American. Back in 2015, the numbers were a little bit below 2%, so we haven't really made much progress. We're about 2% now. And similarly for Hispanics, again, they have low representation in otolaryngology residency programs. And the Census Bureau for US population, again, 18% that identifies Hispanic and Latino, but 4% of our residencies, 4% of our residents identify as Hispanic Latino. So again, in 2015, we were about 3%. We made a little bit of headway, but certainly nothing significant. So just like women, underrepresented minorities do experience the so-called leaky pipeline. And I want to credit our colleagues at the University of Michigan, Dr. Truesdale. This is a figure from an article that they just published, prioritizing diversity in otolaryngology head and neck surgery. It's a fantastic article. I encourage all of you to take a look at it. But they really do reiterate what the underlying issues are, that the leak for underrepresented minorities begins very early in grade school. Students face biases that can hinder their achievement. There are also a lot of socioeconomic factors, limited access to high quality schools, tests, preparation resources, supportive mentorship. All of these contribute to the leaky pipeline. And then certainly the medical students who do make it to medical school, they choose other fields. And perhaps the greatest opportunity for us as a specialty is to understand where this gap is, this big drop off where we have students in medical school, but they're not choosing otolaryngology. How can we be better about the recruitment and interview process? Again, to effectively improve diversity and inclusion, we have to understand the potential barriers, and a number of barriers have been reported. These are just some of the factors that result in that leaky pipeline. Lack of diversity in otolaryngology as a whole, especially our faculty and within our departments. Lack of access to mentors, sponsors, networking. Studies show that mentorship is more effective than any other initiative in increasing workforce diversity. Limited exposure to otolaryngology, not just for underrepresented minorities, but really all of our medical students. The LCME changes at the medical school level. There's less time for students within the surgical subspecialties. So we're just getting limited exposure overall. And then for those who do actually have an interest in otolaryngology, the application landscape, I think, is daunting. We're one of the most competitive residency programs into which one can match. And so these impossible qualifications, Dr. Sarah Bowe described in an article that she wrote. Minority students face bias in grades and evaluations, which can be reflected in their letters of recommendation. We know that admissions to AOA is certainly very important. It affords a higher likelihood of matching into a competitive specialty. But article in JAMA, I think it was 2017, said that even when you account, they looked at this in terms of diversity, that when accounting for educational leadership and sort of all the academic variables, white students are 6 times more likely to be admitted to AOA than Black students. And then that one commonality is these high step 1 scores. The current average step 1 score for US allopathic seniors who match into otolaryngology this past year was 247. So that's pretty high. And scores range in that 25 to 75 percentile, 241 to 255. So those are pretty high numbers there. And unfortunately, program directors put a lot of weight on the STEP scores. This is an NRP program director survey for otolaryngology, where they looked at the percentage of programs that cite the importance of each factor in selecting applicants to interview. And right there at the top, number one, 100% of programs look at step 1 scores. And then right after that is the letters of recommendation. The focus on step 1 scores, again, I think there's data to show it has a detrimental impact on selecting diverse medical students for residency and certainly for our specialty. Interestingly, if you look at the history of this, the USMLE Step 1 was implemented back in 1992 with the primary intention of state licensure. So that numerical score was never designed to be used by program directors as a tool for residency selection or screening. And there's very little evidence to suggest, again, that this predicts clinical outcomes or behaviors or quality of care or success as a resident or physician. But it does seem to be an indication of whether a student, had great education, attended well-resourced schools, had exposure to years of test preparation. So again, it's not a great screening tool or metric. A recent National Board of Medical Examiners study, 2018, showed that female medical students scored 5.9 points lower on step 1 compared to a white male medical student colleague. And then Asian, Hispanic, and Black students scored even lower, 4.5, 12.1, and 16.6 points lower than white male medical students, respectively. So, these are some important metrics to keep in mind. The NBME also did demonstrate that test takers who were not native English-speaking white male U.S. citizens, on average, were likely to score lower on the STEP scores. This article came out of Duke. It's an example of how eliminating step 1 from the application process can reduce racial bias. So this neurology program at Duke, they were focused on sort of an effort to increase the number of URMs that they were inviting to interview. And they implemented this initiative where they eliminated step 1 cutoff score as the applicant screen. And so they reviewed all applications they received. They certainly had to add more faculty to be able to review the extra pool of applications. They educated their application reviewers on implicit bias. They reviewed all the applications using a point system that looked at extracurricular activities, leadership, research experience, letters of recommendation, life experiences. And they found that the strategy increased the number of URMs that they invited to interview. And if you look sort of at the cohort that was interviewed compared to the underrepresented minorities, they found that the only statistically significant difference in the scoring system between the URM and the non-URM applicants was the step 1 score. So again, more information and data to guide us to not use step 1 scores as a screening tool. So the good news is that in 2022, next year, step 1 is going to become entirely pass-fail format. So that hopefully will limit those unintended secondary purposes and serve as a step towards diversifying our profession. But I think we have to be aware of the potential unintended consequences associated with this change. So potential problems include further inflation of residency applications, likely increase in the attention that admission committees are going to pay to step 2 score. So is that going to become the new step 1? Groups such as international medical students and DO physicians, they're not going to be able to use those high step 1 scores anymore to kind of gain that competitive edge within our specialty. And then greater emphasis on subjective assessment of performance. So in the 3rd and 4th year clinical rotations, their grades, again, those letters of recommendation, again, those can be influenced by implicit biases of the supervising physicians. So I think it's even more important for us to perform a thorough, holistic review of applications. This holistic review was coined and developed by the AAMC for medical student admission processes, but it's being used increasingly in residency application review process. I've heard some of my program director colleagues talk about using this. We certainly at Georgetown to do this year. It refers to a admission selection process that takes into account the applicants, again, their experiences, their attributes, as well as their applicant metrics, but it sort of equalizes the field. I heard someone describe it as the holistic review will be a tide that raises all ships equally. So again, I think this holistic review of applications will help widen that lens through which we're going to view applicants and consider the whole applicant rather than disproportionately weighing one particular factor. Structured interview is another way to equalize this whole recruitment process. It has been adopted by some specialties such as general surgery. They standardize the interview process by encouraging sort of this reliable assessment of candidates. It takes away that personal bias because everyone has to use these objective criteria and scoring systems. It does require a lot of front-end training for the faculty. They have to be trained on the basics of conducting a structured interview. That means, making sure that all the questions are related to the position, the job description, asking the questions similarly of all the applicants. Everyone's using the same rating tools in the same manner. With this also comes an opportunity and a need to teach and train interviewers in implicit bias issues. We certainly can't ignore the impact of COVID-19 on this recruitment process. I think there are some positive and negative things that came out of it. On the negative side, we lost the opportunity to have visiting rotations. This has had a tremendous effect for students who didn't have home programs, a negative effect. We saw a rise in the number of applications per applicant, which doesn't help the issue. We don't have any in-person interviews, which kind of takes away that personal dynamic. And then, of course, there was a lot of interview hoarding that went on this year. So those were all negative aspects of COVID. But I think the silver lining in all of this was that we were able to improve our online and our social media presence. We were better about outreach, which I think helps diversity. We were able to bring more students into our departments through virtual sub-internships, through virtual social gatherings and social events. And then the virtual interviews. Again, I think that opens the door to more diverse candidates. There are many who are discouraged to come for a personal interview because there's costs and time constraints. And so now this opens up the door for more people to participate. And then this year, we did implement the preference signaling. And I just want to take a moment to tell you about that. In years past, the medical education community, and especially otolaryngology, had discussed preference signaling for many, many years as a means to mitigate the sort of rapid rise of total applications per program, the number of applicants and applications per program. And again, I want to thank Dr. David Chang for these slides. He did a great job with these. This comes from our ODPO presentation on preference signaling. In 2019, otolaryngology applicants submitted an average of 72 applications. That's an 80% rise over 15 years. This year, 78. So it continues to rise, which is just mind-boggling. And so this increase in applications drives a cycle of programs receiving more applications and students feeling the need to apply to more broadly to maintain their competitiveness. And then students who have the monetary resources, they're better able to sort of mitigate this match risk, and they can apply more broadly, and then they can travel 4-way rotations. And with this onslaught of applications per program, we're in about the 400 plus range now. Applicants really can't distinguish themselves. And then in turn, program directors have a hard time selecting candidates from this pool of excellent applications. So really, it's just sort of this losing battle on both sides. And this is where preference signaling comes in. So the concept, again, here is not new. It was been tossed around as a theoretical solution for the residency application process for years, as I said. It was originally popularized by the American Economic Association. They've been operating a signaling program since 2006 to facilitate job interviews for their graduate students. The applicant is initiated, it says applicant initiated, and it aligns the goals of the interested applicant with the programs. And so in this model for the Economic Association, the students or the applicants have 2 tokens that they can distribute to indicate their interest in receiving an interview from a particular institution or job. So this year in otolaryngology, we decided to bite the bullet. Again, with COVID having a significant impact on our recruitment activities, we no longer had the traditional signaling, which was the away rotations. And then also many students without home programs were really at a clear disadvantage. And so our proposal for otolaryngology, the Otolaryngology Program Directors Organization who implemented this, was that each applicant would get 5 signals, and they would distribute their signals to the programs of their choosing. And so how did it go? Again, it was, we successfully put together the program, we developed it, we deployed it. Some of the early data here is that we had 91% of applicants participate. So of the 611 cohort, 558, vast majority of the students did submit 5 signals, just a handful that did less. In terms of the programs, 128 of the 129 otolaryngology programs participated. This includes the DO programs. A total of 2,784 signals were distributed or received by the programs, and the range was 1 to 71 signals per program. We have now partnered with ERAS to do a much deeper dive to examine the data. Was the program effective? What were the outcomes? Were we able to really match up students? Did students get interviews where they normally may not have gotten interviews? And then how did the programs use signaling? How did they feel that contributed to their interview selection process? So we hope in the next couple of months to really be able to share some really more in-depth and meaningful information to our otolaryngology community. And a couple last points. I mean, there's just so much to talk about. I know time is limited, but other things to think about in modifying the selection process. It's important that we select an inclusive interview team. So we should strategically, as programs, choose individuals who are going to bring diverse outlooks to the application review process and to the interview process, people who are respectful of different cultures and characteristics. We need to understand how our program is making the initial screening decisions. So be familiar with other tools that are out there. Make sure that the tools we're using are fair, they're evidence-based. We need to incorporate, again, these screening tools that level the playing field for everyone. So don't focus on step scores, personal statements, LORs, because they're not standardized. They can be highly subjective. And again, can sort of reflect unequal access to certain resources. We need to train our faculty, certainly our residents as well, in the holistic review process, as well as implicit biases. And we need to actively promote candidates for our specialty who are going to enhance the cultural competency and diversity of otolaryngology. So I'll end here. Addressing diversity certainly has been discussed for years. I think the conversation is now more prevalent, with social media and in our academic journals. But it is time, I think, for programs and institutions to move past this dialogue. We need to really enact some substantive changes in the way we're recruiting students and training our residents. And, we know that, I think we'll all agree that enhancing the heterogeneity of otolaryngology residencies really is a step to repairing that leaky pipeline. And these are just a couple of resources, or there are a lot of great resources out there for programs. And I encourage everyone to take a look at these, especially the one from the Association of Program Directors in General Surgery. It's a really kind of robust, rich, well-designed, lengthy, but worth the read for everyone. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Sonya. That was excellent information. I think we'll transition right into Dr. Gina Jefferson from the University of Mississippi. She will tell us a little bit about what we are doing within the society in our diversity efforts. Gina.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity, and really the opportunity to serve as co-chair of the diversity service of the American Head and Neck Society with Dr. Resto. So today I am sharing some of the work that our diversity service has been working on for the past couple of years, and just appraising where we are. As mentioned earlier, when a diversity service or any other services at its inception, it's important to have a mission that we articulate and work towards on a daily basis. The diversity service is relatively new. I believe it was 2017 that we were begun. The mission is threefold. Promote diversity and inclusion across the professional spectrum of head and neck surgery, in particular, addressing cultural, ethnic, racial, gender, sexual, religious, and disability status. To educate our members the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion for successful implementation of the society's mission and goals. And the mission of our society at large is to, in fact, advance the education, research, and quality of care of the head and neck oncologic patient. And finally, to align our efforts with the American Academy of Otolaryngology and any other related entity navigating the challenges of diversity, equity, and inclusion to strengthen our community, improve public health, reduce disparities. So the American Head and Neck Society received a generous gift from the Myers family. Dr. Eugene and Jeff Myers established an endowment that has been successfully implemented with ongoing contributions of our members. And the main purpose is to expose underrepresented in medicine, medical students to the field of head and neck surgery specifically, but also to otolaryngology in general. and basically using the word pipeline once again to help establish a pipeline of medical students into residency that successfully matriculate through head and neck surgery. Our first award recipient was in 2018, and he in fact took a year off this past year during COVID to complete his MPH, and he is in fact intending to apply for otolaryngology residency. So the pipeline intersects the definition of diverse, and the definition, of course, is what the committee, our service, has been working on. This definition of diversity is, it varies from different perspectives, different professions, different educational institutions. In 1997, the Office of Management and Budget, based on the US Census, categorized the population into 5 racial and 2 ethnic groups, basically to ensure and kind of measure compliance of enactment of civil rights laws for our country. So you can see those there, but the 5 racial groups were white, Black, African American, American Indian, Asian, Native Hawaiian, and the 2 ethnic groups were Hispanic or not. So the AAMC in 1997 at the same time also adopted those similar categories to the Office of Management and Budget. But in 2003, the AAMC decided to shift its focus and make it a more dynamic kind of working definition from a fixed aggregation of those 4 racial and ethnic groups to a continually evolving underlying reality of our population shift. To any racial and ethnic population that's underrepresented in the medical profession, hence URIM, underrepresented in medicine, relative to the numbers in the general population at large. And you can see that other professional organizations related to science, like the National Science Foundation, includes women in their definition. The National Institute of Health includes individuals with disabilities, individuals from disadvantaged backgrounds that they specify as socioeconomically disadvantaged or living in a rural community. There was a survey back in 2011 where academic health center diversity officers were surveyed. There were 89 respondents. The questions were with respect to how the institutions increase their diversity. And of those 89 respondents, 51% said that they in fact used the 2003 AAMC definition. 14% used the pre-2003 simple definition that was first espoused, and that 30% of these respondents also considered other factors like the National Science Foundation and NIH to include socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, disability, rural upbringing, and first-generation education. Why is this significant to our membership of the American Head and Neck Society? Well, to facilitate the work of our, the mission of our society, we really do need to appraise the society demographics to really inform our own definition. The makeup of the physician pool at large is different than the United States Census population stats. So we really need to define what we're trying to improve. Secondly, to create as broad as possible a definition to reduce the disparity of head and neck surgical workforce, that we can best treat our patient population, as already discussed. Having a diverse physician pool enables us to interact and understand our patients' point of view, garner their trust. It also enables us to solicit diverse patient representation in ongoing clinical trials. And finally, longitudinal study of the American Head and Neck Society demographics will really assist us in measuring the success of our efforts and initiatives that we implement for, in fact, increasing diversity. So our proposal to the American Head and Neck Society is to, first, upon gaining membership and renewing our dues, to complete the demographic survey that we are distributing. It's an elective survey, but it will really help in terms of garnering our numbers and really assessing what it is our society actually looks like. Regarding current programming for our underrepresented in medicine initiatives, currently we're using the United States Census-based Office of Management and Budget definition when we're reviewing the applications for the Myers Summer Fellowship. But every year we really do want to reassess our American Head and Neck Society member demographic in order to adjust the definition that our society uses in order to appropriately develop ongoing initiatives for increasing diversity of head and neck surgeons. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Gina. That's a ton of excellent information that I hope everybody has enjoyed. I want to quickly pivot over to Dr. Girod and Dr. Krouse. Any additional commentary? You both bring very highly integrating perspectives to each of your organizations, which in fact focus in important ways around aspects of diversity. Doug, I'll let you go first.
Sure. Thank you, Vicente, and thank you for having us to be part of this panel. Really impressive set of data that was presented today, and thought, and I commend the society for taking this on. And I, currently where I sit, I'm at the front end of that leaky pipeline, right? And as an organization that has 14,000 employees and 28,000 students, you would think we'd be very reflective of our society, and in fact, we are not. And much has been discussed here. Our numbers have not changed in 10 years. And so really our problems at the broader university are very much those that you're facing sort of at the other end of the pipeline. And we've got to fix our end to help you fix your end. There's no question about that. I would also add, and it was mentioned a couple of times, there are, depending on where you are, there may be in Jackson, a very different place than we are demographically. So your definitions actually can change a little bit based on where you are. And I say that because in Kansas, we have 105 counties, 90 of those counties are rural to frontier. And so when we think about providing medical providers to our community, that's a very big part of that is that rural and first gen, because a lot of those people out in those counties are first generation as well. So not forgetting that group of people as we put our focus on that is important. And then lastly, I just comment, I hear regularly now, it's really our disabled population that is feeling fairly overlooked at this point in time. And when we think our campus is on a hilltop, so that creates incredible mobility challenges as an example. Our academic medical centers are not well set up for that either. And so I think we also need to be sure we're keeping that definition quite broad as we go through it.
Thank you, Doug. Jack, do you want to share some thoughts with us?
Sure, Vicente, thank you. And Doug, we do have the difference here at UTRGV. We are the second largest Hispanic serving institution in the country and have a very large and diverse population. And part of that is our mission is to take care of the region. But what we find, and I think something that has been said over and over today here, is pipeline. Realize that pipeline, really, you need to reach low in pipeline. You need to get into the middle schools. You need to get into the high schools. You need to develop programs that reach down, that look for underrepresented minorities in medicine and bring them along the best you can from middle school. And we've worked hard to develop those types of programs to give opportunity to those who might otherwise not have that opportunity. And then you can develop joint programs with the undergraduate campus, which we've done. You can develop early conditional acceptance programs in order to get people into medical school conditionally from high school. I think as we reach down earlier into the pipeline, it gives us that opportunity to build capacity later in the pipeline, and then to build in programs at the medical school level that really encourage individuals to take opportunities to move into specialties that have traditionally been competitive. I think those are very important, and that's something we really value and can learn from. one of my other hats that I wear, Vicente, is as editor-in-chief of otolaryngology head and neck surgery. And I think the professional journals and societies have great responsibility here. And Sonya was kind enough to mention the Truesdale paper, which we published in AHNS in February. It was really a good discussion of this topic. So we are going to be having a special issue. We have a call for papers out now for the journal to look at diversity, equity, inclusion, not only in the educational sphere, but in health equity and in delivery of healthcare. And I think the journals need to take leadership here and encourage the publication of papers that look at innovative solutions to these problems. So happy to be here. Thanks again, Vicente, and I enjoyed the conversation very much this morning.
Excellent. Well, I want to quickly thank all the panelists and transition over for any questions that the audience may have.
Hey, Vicente, could I make one more comment? And it really pertains to a lot of what Sonya delivered. You know, as we go to more holistic views, really things like your rotation evaluations and your letters of recommendation become very important. And I think there's a huge amount of bias that still sits at that level. And I think it's going to take a lot of education and training of our faculty to be able to overcome some of that. And as you discussed, that's, you know, as we go to pass fail on boards, you know, really to be holistic, that's got to be a level playing field as well.
You know, Doug, let's kind of tie on to that a little bit, because one of the questions that I wanted to hear some thoughts from the group is really foundationally, are we talking to the right people? And what kind of things are we saying to those individuals? What do you guys think? Dr. Mason, I'm calling you.
Yes, so from a recruitment perspective, Dr. Resto, is that your question?
Well, I would say it's mostly, you know, in terms of addressing the issue, there's the target, right? The underrepresented medicine would like to bring in, but then there's the rest of us who make those decisions.
Oh, absolutely. So this was a question that I actually was just typing an answer to in the chat before you asked, Dr. Resto. So it is imperative that we, as those who are in positions of power and decision-making, do enough reflection, enough pre-work to make sure that we are entering into the recruitment and then also continuing the retention and evaluation process in consideration of our own biases. And I don't think that we as physicians have especially given ourselves permission to do that work. But this is where it starts. I think it starts with the individual, and it certainly starts with us who are in positions where we have abilities to influence who comes into our programs and how they are and who's selected and who's retained. To this end, the AACOM, AAMC, ACGME, and ECFMG have just released a transition to residency toolkit that I put into the chat. Hopefully everybody can see that, to address issues that interns will face transitioning into residency after a year of COVID and not having the exposure clinically that they would have ordinarily gotten as they come into residency. And we think this could have a disproportionate and negative effect on our underrepresented interns who may or may not have gotten this exposure, who may present not as clinically adept as we would have wanted them to without that additional exposure. So then what adjustments can we make as leadership, as faculty, to not automatically move to presuming inadequacy, but what additional resources through a lens of equity do we need to provide our new residents to make sure that we get them up to stuff? Because many of them have not had the opportunities to have those third and fourth year rotation experiences, hands-on experiences as they would have had prior to that. And we have to bring that awareness to our leadership, to our faculty, such that we know and we're not disadvantaging or marginalizing any of our new residents or interns as they matriculate in. So I really appreciate being able to talk about what to do and how to do it, and not just, theories and academic posturing. So it's time for us to act, as Dr. Jefferson stated.
Excellent. Thank you for that answer. I'm going to jump over here online, and we have a question from Dr. Chandrasekhar, specifically really an extension of this discussion, where the question is essentially, how is that being addressed, particularly in terms of clerkship evaluations and any implicit bias? Any thoughts the group can share from your own work or your organizational work? Jack, I'll go to you.
Okay, thanks, Vicente. No, I think it's a very good question. And I think we need to be aware that faculty need to be trained. Faculty need to have very deep education around implicit bias, in structural racism, and all of these concepts. And we can't just assume that faculty are going to be neutral without really giving them the tools to understand the problem, the extent of the problem, and then how they can be more self-aware. So we have done that. We have included mandatory training based on material available from the AAMC for all of our faculty. And what our goal is that by understanding the scope of the problem and how they can become more aware responders to these kinds of evaluations, it will improve the quality and the nature of these kinds of clerkship evaluations. So it needs to be done intentionally. It's not going to just happen unless we take a proactive approach and intervene.
Excellent. Thank you. The follow-up question from Dr. Chandrasekhar is whether the society, or perhaps otolaryngology in general and its programs, tapped into a group called BNGAPs, which are devoted to underrepresented in medicine students and helping them thrive in academic medicine. Sonya, is this something that are you aware that we've tapped into?
I am not aware of that particular organization. Certainly, I think there are societies within otolaryngology that have put a lot of effort and emphasis on this. So certainly the American Academy of Otolaryngology Head and Neck Surgery, they have developed programs and outreach for students, to increase diversity. The Harry Barnes Society, they have a fantastic program that focuses on this as well. And then at the medical school level, there are many organizations devoted to Hispanic, African-American, Asian, so they have their own specific opportunities there, but I'm not particularly familiar with the one that Dr. Chandrasekhar is referring to.
Anyone else in the group? Jack, Doug, Gina?
I'm not familiar with that particular organization either, but I was going to tag on to Sonya's response and just saying that there are many different fragmented kind of efforts to increasing exposure of underrepresented in medicine to otolaryngology. But when we use the word pipeline, I think we do need to establish more of a concerted effort that's joint, as our mission statement for our diversity service actually states, collaborating with, in fact, the American Academy of Otolaryngology. I know the Harry Barnes Society has done programming, for example, where local underrepresented in medicine, wherever the academy meeting is held, are sponsored to come to the opening ceremony and attend some of the educational events at the academy, so they get exposure to otolaryngology as well as leaders in the organization. I just think it requires a more concerted effort.
Excellent, thank you. Well, I'm sorry, Dr. Mason, you wanted to add something?
And I was going to just add that we encourage our specialty associations to also work with the National Medical Association, the National Hispanic Medical Association, and then also NIAMS that represents our Native American populations across the country. So from a larger specialty perspective, we have to be intentional about engaging the smaller organizations in this work. So thank you so much.
Great. Well, in the interest of time, to keep the program on time, I want to wrap up here. Firstly, A couple parting words. I think, and I hope that people take home several important messages. First and foremost, what an underrepresented minority in medicine is absolutely changing. It's dynamic. It is regional. So that, by consequence, really truly requires that each of us as leaders participate in establishing such a definition, because it's where efforts start. It's how we define where we are and where we're going to go. Also, the take-home message of pipeline. We're busy, but it is critical that we participate to whatever extent we're able to at different levels, down to potentially high schools and middle schools in our local communities, because ultimately that's will be driving the pool of individuals we hope to ultimately recruit successfully to our areas. Thank you to all our panelists. I really appreciate taking the time and delivering such a high quality content. I hope everybody else enjoyed it as much. Melanie?
Thank you so much, Dr. Resto, and thank you to the panel. This was really an excellent in-depth discussion, and I'm sure we could go on beyond this. But what we learned today, thank you, we'll take that with you. And I just want to mention Dr. Mason, the chat she was talking about is acgme.org/COVID-19/transition to residency. So you can find that at the ACGME website. But thank you for everyone who participated. We're going to take a 1-minute break, and then we'll move on to the next panel.